Whether it's been months since you've seen the time system, or if you've never seen it before, this video demonstrates the basic components of the time system. We'll cover the login requirements for both self-service and the Time Direct link, basic system terminology, general system navigation, how to view and manage employee data, and how to test timesheet calculations to validate that payrolls are correct. Logging in. If you are an Ascentus client who uses self-service, you will need your self-service link, your user ID, and your password. If you've never entered into the system before, but have your self-service link, click on the Sign Up Here option to get started. Even if you have access to self-service, you may not have the Timekeeper tab available to you yet. This needs to be turned on by either your HR consultant, payroll consultant, or project manager. Sometimes your time consultant provides the direct link into the time system. This helps limit who has access to time if you are still in the implementation process. If you are a time-only client or a self-service client that has been provided the direct link to time, you will need your time link, your login ID, and your password or the default password your consultant provided. Are you logging into the employee side of the system or the user side of the system? If you're logging into the user side, you'll see a login button. If you're logging into the employee side, you'll either see an Employee Web Service button, or you'll see buttons such as Punch, Punch Out, or Transfer. Knowing the link you're logging into is important because different links can require different login credentials. If you are in implementation and need this information, reach out to your time consultant. If you plan to follow along in your site, now would be a good time to pause the video and get logged in. When you're ready, remember to press play. System terminology. We'll review what is a user versus an employee, and define a menu, category, page, tab, and section. First, we'll cover what a user is. A user is someone who is responsible for one or more of the following items: managing timesheets, managing employee data, managing time off requests, processing payroll, managing payrolls. These people are also known as system administrator, supervisor, or manager. On the other side, we have employee, and this is typically someone who is responsible for one or more of the following items: recording their own time, whether punching or through manual entry, requesting time off, or reporting expenses. In the top left-hand corner of the screen is the menu. The menu leads you to any place you want or need to go in the system. There are other ways to navigate to some of the most common pages in the system, but you can always find what you need directly from the menu. When the menu opens, you see all the categories you have access to in the system. This is the first level of grouping. When you hover over a category, you see all of the pages in that category. This is the second level of grouping. Some pages also display different tabs that are available on that page. This is the third level of grouping. If you ask anyone at Ascentus where something is found in time, the answer should always include what category, what page, and possibly what tab the item is found on. Although most commonly found in the configuration pages are sections. As the image shows, you can see where you are at any point on these pages. The top left-hand side shows the category and page. All other pages available in that category show as the first row of options. Under those pages shows all the tabs on that page. And lastly, you have the sections of that tab. General navigation. We'll focus on how to use the menu, how to favorite pages, how to use navigational arrows from the gadget, and how to utilize quick link buttons found on other pages throughout the system. To use the menu, click on the menu, hover over the proper category, find and hover over the proper page or tab, click on the option to launch the page. Favoriting a page. To set a page as a favorite, navigate to that page first. I'm going through the menu, hovering over the attendance category, and then I'll click on the accruals history page. Once the page loads, you'll see a tab at the top of the page that has an image and then the name of that page. Click on the image so that a gold star appears. This will favorite the page. The next time you launch into the time system as this user or employee, that tab will automatically appear at the top. To launch into that page, simply click on the word. Navigational arrows are found on the dashboard, both in the employee side of the system and the user side of the system. On my dashboard, you'll see a navigational arrow in the time off request calendar and a navigational arrow in the user reports gadget. Clicking on the arrow in the respective gadget will launch you into that page. Quick link buttons appear throughout the system, most commonly found on the timesheet page and the employee info page. I'll navigate to the timesheet page by going through the menu, hovering over the attendance category, and clicking on timesheets. On the top part of the page by the employee's name and ID number, you'll see a little person icon. This will launch you to that employee's employee info page. You'll see a calendar, which will launch you to that employee's schedule. From the employee info page, again at the top of the page by the employee's name and the employee's ID number, you'll see a clock, which will launch you into that employee's timesheet, and a calendar, which will launch you into that employee's schedule. Let's navigate to the accruals page and see the quick link buttons from there. To the menu, attendance category, click on accruals. At the top of this page, once again by the employee's name and ID number, you'll see a button that says Go to Timesheets, which will launch you into that employee's timesheet. Go to Employee, which will launch you into that employee's employee info page. And go to Schedule, which will launch you into that employee's schedule. Employee data. We'll cover navigating to the pages, reviewing or updating employee info information, and reviewing the employee personal page. To navigate to the employee info page, click on the menu, hover over the employees category, and click on Employee Info. If you have Ascentus HR and/or payroll, most of the employee data flows from those programs into time, but there are still some time-specific fields that need to be updated. If you are a time-only client, you will most likely be responsible for managing employees in the system for all required and optional fields. However, there are some other payroll providers that do import basic employee information into the system. If you're unsure how your employee information enters into the system, reach out to your time consultant. The required fields on the employee info page include the first name, last name, status, hire date, a termination date if the employee is set to inactive or leave without pay, the employee ID number, a badge number if using a time clock, all work group information, these are also called labor levels or groups, and all pay rules information. The pay policy describes employee overtime rules and rounding rules, and possibly guaranteed hours for salaried employees. Shift number will describe the employee's work hours and work days. Pay type can be set to exempt, non-exempt, or FLSA eligible. The pay category attaches the employee to the appropriate FMLA, accrual, and points rule. The holiday rule connects the employees to the appropriate holidays and automatic payment of holiday hours. And pay method can be set to hourly, salary, hourly seasonal, or salaried seasonal. Optional fields on the employee info page include the send schedule approval requests. This field identifies which users, supervisor or administrators, should receive email notifications about time off requests and timesheet submittals for this employee. Enabling the EWS checkbox and selecting an access group. The checkbox enables the employee to use the website for any reason, and this would include punching or requesting time off. And the access group identifies what access the employee should have in the website. Should they be able to punch from their dashboard? Should they have access to the timesheet page? If so, should it be read-only or full access? And the Assign To field, which is one way to assign an employee to their direct supervisor. Ascentus clients usually use the Assign To field to indicate who the direct supervisor is for each employee. Clicking on the Personnel page will bring us to the personal information. Information on this page includes the email address for the employee. This is where time off request management emails will be sent when the supervisor or manager approves or declines a time off request. The phone number, number 1 or number 2 field, which can be used when setting up the mobile app to send validation, and any user-defined fields. These fields are commonly used for additional PTO dates necessary or additional information that cannot be added anywhere else into the system. Next, we'll go through navigating to the timesheet and validating those pay rules. Click on your menu, hover over the attendance category, and click on Timesheets. Click on the appropriate employee on your employee list on the left-hand side of the page. I'm currently going to use Ashley Beadle as my test subject. To add time to the timesheet, find your date column and click in it, and select the appropriate date. Next, find the pay code column and click on it, and select the appropriate pay code. If you're going to test rounding rules or overtime rules, you'll most likely need the 0 work hours pay code. Then enter the in time and the out time. In this instance, I'm going to say the employee took a meal break. So for the first part of their day, they worked from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. To put the second half of their day, I'm going to select the same date, the same pay code, and the time they punched back in from their meal, and then the time they punched out at the end of the day. Make sure that when you tab or click away from the space, The time that's still showing is correct to what you're testing. Once you're done adding time for this, click Save and see how the system calculates that time. Did the timesheet calculate correctly? In this instance, my timesheet did not calculate correctly. What I'm going to do first is on that top row where I see the employee's name and ID number, to the left of the name, you'll see two arrows pointing away from each other. If you click on those arrows, it's going to extend the information at the top of the screen that can show you some setup information. In this case, I can see the employee is in the default location, in the Department of Marketing, in the weekly pay policy, and in a fixed shift working 8 to 5 a.m. with an automatic meal deduction of 60 minutes. From this, I can see that since I only put 30 minutes in for a meal, the system is taking out the remaining 30 minutes to automatically deduct the 60 minutes. If you haven't been trained on how to manage shifts or schedules yet, reach out to your time implementation consultant and let them know your findings. Most administrators have access to the shift setup pages. Try clicking on the shift number to launch into the shift setup and review the Meals tab. Now that I know the reason for how the system calculated the hours, I can confirm, in my case, that the system is calculating it correctly. To minimize that top section of the page again, use the minus button off to the far right-hand side. And remember, you can always click on those arrows pointing away from each other again, should you need to extend the information and see those details. On this next example, let's review timesheet exceptions. We know that this employee should be working from 8 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday. Let's see if the system will trigger tardies or early outs if we put the punches accordingly. So again, I'm going to select my date, my pay code. Let's make this employee tardy by 20 minutes. I'll put 8:20 on the timesheet. And let's punch them out early by 15 minutes. So we'll put 4:45 p.m. Once the page is saved, you should see those exceptions in the in EXP, which stands for in exception, and out EXP, which stands for out exception. So in this case, the system's doing exactly as I'd expected. The employee is supposed to work at 8 a.m. They punched in tardy by 20 minutes, so the system is putting a T20 in the in exception column. The employee is supposed to work until 5 p.m., but punched out 15 minutes early at 4:45 p.m., and the system is marking them early out by 15 minutes. If your system doesn't color code these areas, but you'd like them to, reach out to your time consultant and let them know what you'd like. Next, let's try out some rounding. In my database, I have it configured to round to the nearest quarter hour. So I'm going to again select a date, select that work hours pay code. I'm going to put 7:50 as the in time and 5 p.m. as the out time. Now I would expect the 7:50 to push backwards to 7:45 and the 5 p.m. not to round at all. When I click Save, we'll be able to see how the system calculates those hours. The employee is now recorded as 8.25 hours, indicating that it's probably rounding the 7:50 back to 7:45. There is an easier way to see how the system is rounding punches by finding and moving the in-round and out-round columns. I'm going to scroll over to the right-hand side of my page and find those columns. Here we can see that the in time is rounding to 7:45 and the out time is rounding to 5 p.m. If you do not see these columns on your timesheet, reach out to your time implementation consultant. You can also move your columns around to make them easier to identify with. Once you're scrolled over to the left-hand side of the page, on that area where it shows the employee's name and employee ID number, you'll find a little section that looks like an Excel workbook. If you hover over it, it'll say Select Required Columns. Click on that. It'll pop up a box that allows you to check or uncheck columns that you'd like to see or not see on the timesheet. This also allows you to reorder the columns just for your single login. I'm going to scroll down my list, click on my first column to move so that it highlights in green, and then use the arrows off to the right-hand side to move it up to where I'd like it on the timesheet. Then I'll scroll back down and do the same thing with the next column. Once I'm done, I'll click OK. Now I can easily see that my 7:50 in punch is rounding to 7:45, and the system's still triggering that early in by 10 minutes. And my 5 p.m. out time is not rounding at all and is showing as 5 p.m. If we change that 7:50 punch to 7:55 and save, we should see the system change the in-round column to 8 o'clock based off of my current database configuration. And the system did exactly as I expected. If your testing doesn't produce accurate results, reach out to your time consultant. Let's test now how the system handles overtime. If you have daily overtime, make sure to give the employee enough hours in a single day to trigger that. And if you have weekly overtime, same. You'll want to add in enough hours to trigger the employee into overtime. I'm going to add hours to trigger my weekly overtime. So I'll select my day, my pay code, and my in and out times for every day of this week. On the last day of this week, I'm going to push the employee into overtime by 1 hour. When I save the timesheet, it should indicate 40 regular hours and 1 hour of overtime. And the system did exactly as I expected it to. It's triggering a laid out exception, and it's also triggering my overtime hours. Similar to the coloring in the in express and out express columns, your overtime column may or may not show a different coloring when the employee goes into overtime. If you'd like your system to show a different color when employees go into overtime, contact your time consultant and let them know, and they'll get that set up for you. Continue testing any other overtime situation. Do you have consecutive day overtime? Make sure you put enough time on the timesheet to push the employee into that consecutive day. Does consecutive day follow just in that work week, in that pay period, any span of time? Do you have meal premiums if employees don't take meals before the expected amount of time or their meals aren't long enough? Make sure to enter records onto the timesheet to force that as well. Whether you're working with a real employee who's currently not using the system, or you're working with a test employee, you can always delete the records you're testing with so that there's no permanent information in the system. You can always view the timesheet summary at the bottom of the page to see exactly how the system is calculating the total hours for that timesheet. And lastly, when you're done testing, you can delete all the entries on this timesheet by clicking in this box in the top left-hand corner. It'll check mark all of the records on that page and then click delete. That'll clean up the timesheet so you can continue any additional testing or log out of the system if you're done. Make sure to not only test for your hourly employees for overtime rounding rules, also make sure to check your salaried employees to ensure they don't have any overtime, or any of your employees that may have guaranteed hours. If you'd like to use the same test employee for every type of scenario, after deleting the timesheet records, Head to the Employees Info page. You can use that quick link right at the top of the page. Once the page loads, scroll down, change the employee's pay policy, possibly their shift number, and save the page. Then go back to the timesheet and try your next sequence of testing. Let's recap the items covered in this video. We went through the different login requirements for time, both as an Ascentus client through self-service and a time client through the Time Direct link. We talked about some general system terminology. We navigated throughout the system. We reviewed and updated employee data. And we went and tested some timesheet calculations, including overtime and rounding rules. If you have any additional questions or concerns about utilizing the time system, if you're in implementation, reach out to your time consultant. If you're past the implementation stage, please reach out to our support team.